I think to fully understand the richness of these readings, we need to understand a little about the ancient Hebrew compass. Yes, as in north, south, east, and west. Let's start with south and go clockwise. One Hebrew word that was used for south was Negev, which comes from the name of the desert to the south of Israel. Much of that land was very inhospitable desert. A word for west in ancient Hebrew was Yam, which means the sea. Pretty sensible, because the Mediterranean Sea is to the west of Israel. And we must remember that to the Israelites, the sea was often a treacherous, dangerous, and scariest of all, a chaotic place. A word for north was Tsaphon, which might come from the word for hidden, since the sun hides from the north. At least that's the perspective of someone living in the northern hemisphere, where the sun hangs out in the southern part of the sky. This makes the north a cold, dark place. But while the south was associated with a lifeless desert, the west with the chaotic sea, and the north with darkness, the east was associated with God. In our first reading, Micah prophesied that from Bethlehem, the ancestral land of King David, would come the Messiah, whose origin is of old, from ancient times. But the Hebrew word used here for from ancient times can also mean from the east. In a sense, both are right. We know that the Messiah is from ancient times. He is God himself. But the orientation to the east is also significant, because east was the direction from which God came. According to tradition, east was the direction Adam faced when God first breathed life into him. East is the direction from which the sun rises, and because of this understanding, east was the direction that the temple in Jerusalem faced. This is significant for our psalm as well. Our psalmist says, "May your help be with the man of your right hand, with the Son of Man, whom you yourself made strong." The term Son of Man is connected to David and the line of kings. And in Jerusalem, the king's palace sat to the south of the temple. So as the king sat on his throne, he was literally on the right hand of God's dwelling place in the temple, both united facing east. This has also led to the tradition of having churches face the east when possible. We're close. East is about that way. Our second reading from Hebrews quotes Psalm 40 and points to the reality that the animal sacrifices in that eastward-facing temple were not part of God's very first plan for the Israelites, but prescribed after Israel's sin at Sinai. The author of Hebrews understood that Christ the Messiah had come to fulfill this psalm, to transition the people of God from outward acts of animal sacrifice to the inward work of following God's will in our hearts. Christ accomplished this by offering himself as the perfect sacrifice, and appropriately, the Lamb of God arrived in Jerusalem to accomplish this from the east, moving from the Mount of Olives on Holy Thursday westward into the city. There is one more Easterly reference this time of year, and that is in the O antiphons. In these last days before Christmas, starting yesterday, December 17th, the church gives us 7 antiphons, one per day, that all start with O and a title of Christ. They start, O wisdom, O Lord, O root of Jesse, O key of David, O day star, O King of the nations, and O Emmanuel. But in this case, we don't need a Hebrew compass, we need a Latin one. The O antiphon for December 21st, O day star, in Latin is O oriens, from the same root as orientem, or Latin for east, where we get the word orient. So the Jewish people and our Christian ancestors wanted to be united in their eastward orientation. They wanted this unity to avoid the distractions of the world, the lifeless South, the chaotic West, and the dark North, instead focusing on the life, the order, and the light found in God. In these final days before Christmas, we want to reflect on our own orientation, or all too often, our disorientation. Sometimes in this season, a cynical world scoffs at a lifeless Christmas party, or chaotic preparations, or even the darkness of our northern hemisphere in the winter, holding them up as signs that contradict the joy of the season. But we must have hearts like Elizabeth and John the Baptist today, properly oriented to watch for God's coming. I think there's no better reminder than the witness of an unborn John the Baptist that these parallels of outward orientation to the East are meant to foster our inward orientation to God. St. John Chrysostom said, "John has not yet left the womb, but he speaks by leaping. He is not yet allowed to cry out, but he makes himself heard by his actions. He has not yet seen the light, but he points out the sun." If through our prayer and preparations we have hearts a little bit like John, then we won't be distracted by the South, the West, or the North, and will be sure to see the sun rising in the East.